Welcome to Rauta's very first classic album review. As you already know, because you're watching this video is about Morbid Angel and the album called Formulas Fatal to the Flesh. Now, when I was pondering which album to pick for the first classic review album, which was set to the very last day of November 2017. At first, I had a totally different album in my mind. But as the events unfolded, it became clear to me that just one day before Kingdom's Disdained, the 10th full-length album by Morbid Angel, it was clear to me that we have to feature Morbid Angel. Only one question remained, and that was, which album to pick out of all those good ones? This album is by no means my favorite albums of Morbid Angel. Is actually one of the least favorites. But the reason is, now Steve Tucker is back in the band with Kingdom's Disdained. So I thought it would be nice to take a glimpse what he did when he first entered the lineup of Morbid Angel back in 1998 with Formulas Fatal to the Flesh. Of course, he had been in the band for some time before the release of the album, but this was the very first album where he actually, kind of showed his skill both as a vocalist and as an instrument artist. So, Formulas Fatal to the Flesh is the album which I have probably listened to the least amount of times when it comes to the whole discography. Well, I'm not sure, maybe Heretic even less. But nevertheless, given the very fact that it's 19 years already when this album came out, it still feels kind of like it was yesterday, and at the same time it feels like it was some 20 years ago, as it is. So, this is my personal copy of Formulas Fatal to the Flesh. As you can see, there's even these store stickers both on the back and the front side, which kind of reminds me, maybe I got this second hand. I'm not totally sure, but maybe I did. At first I thought that there's no reason basically to go through booklets and all that stuff, but then it kind of became clear to me that it's not so given that people actually know this album throughoutly, and maybe we can pinpoint some nice little details here and there before we actually talk about the music on the album. By this time, the Morbid Angel had been there for some 15 years or so, and so they had already did those classic albums, not only Ultras of Madness, but also the ones that came right after that, which actually made it, the whole band to become kind of a cornerstone of a whole death metal genre. And still to this day, it's one of the most unique bands that still exist in the death metal genre. And by the time they had got out in Formulas Fatal to the Flesh, it was clear that this band was always going to be something really important to the whole genre, as well as being one of the bands that actually helped to, define the whole music that death metal was meant to be. And my personal opinion is that Morbid Angel is one of the best death metal bands ever. Not my number one favorite, but that beside the point. It still is a very important band to me, as you can pretty much guess from my garage gym flag, as well as the shirt I'm wearing, which is no coincidence. I just picked for this, for the review. Anyway, so let's take a look on the cover. As you can see, this is very different from the style they had, early 90s or, even late 80s. This is very much, going to the modern era of death metal, so to speak. Late 90s, not only for death metal, but also black metal, basic heavy metal and all that stuff. This was kind of a transition phase, in my opinion, when different kind of ideas were just, back and forth for the album covers, and so here it is. This is something that isn't still the digital era, but definitely something different in my opinion. And those that were not clever enough to figure it out, FFF is the kind of abbreviation of the album, which means, of course, 666. So a little inside info for those that never got the idea. This also presented this kind of a symbolism, which are here presented in a very Morbid Angel way. Inside, the lyrics are, well laid out, kind of in the typical way that albums in the back used to be. Clear font, some imagery, everything just is there in place. And as you can see, compared to many albums in the extreme metal genre, these lyrics are not the typical ones, nor they are short ones with just a few lines of text. There's lots of stuff to basically read and to remind if you want to get this album going from your mouth when you're listening to the album. And a curious fact is that you don't get to see these kind of information that much these days, but now the zoom is failing me, but you can see there's a fan club information. Clearly it says Covenant of Death, PO Box 1441 and all that stuff, Florida. So fan club information, and even though this is already the age of internet, you can see morbidangel.com there. It's just kind of a funny thing because at this time fan clubs were, in my opinion, more or less dead or gone with the internet and all that stuff. It still is there. And thanks lists, these are huge on any standards. If you take a look at nowadays albums or even many of the older ones, the CD is kind of plain track list, and clearly you can see the record label, name of the album. This is not a given even anymore these days. I suddenly actually hate when I get an album which is only some vague cover or weird ass picture and doesn't ring a bell to which kind of which album covers this should be be part of. But anyway, things change. And one of the curious facts is inside the jewel case actually is this weird picture. Now I don't know what these guys were thinking when hitting this kind of a camouflage thing and having this mic stand on it. Weirdest things with these kind of albums. That is just, Morbid Angel. Now, finally, let's talk a little bit of the music. For Most Fatal to the Flesh, the reason why I never listened to that much compared to the, most of the albums in the discography is that it kind of lacked and still lacks the, instant hit songs which were so much present at, the first albums. After Domination, which clearly seemed to divide the audience, Formal Fatal to the Flesh is seemed so much, straightforward, kind of a modern era of death metal. If Altar of Madness was kind of thrash-infused death metal, which had those really killer songs, then, Blessed Are the Sick and Covenant basically, had this evolution, kind of a progress from this band that was basically just, kind of finding its form. And these were like clear steps forward, which way to go. Now, Domination is one of my favorites, basically, maybe with Altars of Madness, my favorite Morbid Angel album. I still know that many people actually don't like it that much. It's mediocre or just weird or boring, I don't know. But to me, it has very cool defining moments when it comes to death metal and Morbid Angel. Now, For Most Fatal to the Flesh, I guess, was a little bit of disappointment. Not only because now it didn't feature the previous vocalist anymore. Vincent was gone, and now this guy Steve Tucker, basically nobody had stepped to fill his huge shoes and try to take over of this Dave Vincent's really charismatic low vocals. Now, I think this kind of a burden, you know, left Formula's Fatal to the Flesh in a position that it was basically impossible to, make a strong comeback and, show that this band is very much back into the game, and nevertheless, they have lost his bass vocalist guy. It still can be replaced, and no one is like, irreplaceable. But nevertheless, now it seems that these kind of thoughts were a little bit weird, bizarre even, because Formula Fatal to the Flesh is clearly Morbid Angel album. It's a strong one, even though it doesn't have these kind of like we call instant hits or maybe the most memorable moments. To be honest, I remember this album being more chaotic and more fast-paced than what it actually was, because I just, like a couple of days ago, I just gave it a few spins to, actually to kind of refresh my memory, so I don't just, talk based on what I felt back in the late 90s, early 2000 or whatever. So to me, it kind of felt like having this old friend, which I didn't even kind of realize being this good. It had been on my shelf for many, many years without any spins. But now that I gave it a go, a few actually, I kind of felt like, hey man, this is so much better than what I thought it would be. But still, I must say, the lack of these hit songs is kind of disappointment still to this very day. Maybe the only one which I want to actually mention is the invocation of the continual one, which is basically kind of a rockish song on Morbid Angel scale. Nevertheless, it's probably the best one and the most memorable one, and it kind of reminds me of the earlier albums by the very band. Now, the thing which kind of was set up earlier, prior to Formula's Fatal to the Flesh, was these weird interludes, these kind of one of a kind, unique synth parts, with Trey Azagdot doing his, I don't know, experimentations. And, Domination already had them, but I think Formula's Fatal to the Flesh took them like one or two steps forward. And to this day, I still don't know whether or not it was a good idea or just a weird idea, because that also happened in Heretic, maybe a little bit on Gateways to Annihilation. I surely can't remember. Those don't stick to my head after these many years of kind of absence with the album. So, I don't know. Formula's Fatal to the Flesh is still not my favorite Morbid Angel album. It's far from being that. But it's also one of those albums that clearly deserve its classical title. It's one of those death metal albums that, maybe apart from the production, which is a little bit mushy and maybe a little bit powerless compared to the many bands that nowadays have more crushing, more kind of a sharper sound, yet without being too sterile or anything like that. Still, for most, the Fatal to the Flesh is a little bit mushy, as I remember that it would be, but it has stood the test of time. It's one of those albums that probably I'm not the only one who basically forgot in the collection and kind of didn't return to it, while there was no reason why not to do it. My excuse is always the same. I get way too many albums for review, so I'm kind of always stuck with them rather than, going back to the old albums. But these still deserve very much my attention. I had great time listening to it a few times and kind of, refreshing all the good feelings that Morbid Angel has been giving me throughout the years. So what can I say? Formula's Fatal to the Flesh is a great album. A great album is totally deserving your time. Still, nevertheless, some 19 years after its release. And even though it's not the best album, and there might be some people who just disagree with me on that, and it's totally fine. Even though it's not the best album by the band, it's totally worth time. And the kind of a fun thing is that it clearly shows how good musician and vocalist Steve Tucker is. So, looking forward to hear Kingdom's Disdain. Will it gonna beat it? Will it not? I don't know. Today's day, only one song released, and we were not the lucky ones to get the promotional copy for the album, so who knows? In a couple of days after this video, we are so much smarter and more knowledgeable about the way this band is gonna go now on. But Formula's Fatal to the Flesh, it's a classic. If you missed it back in the days, now you can fix it because it's a good album and it's definitely has deserved your attention. Give it a go. Thank you for watching, and that's all from me. Please come back again for more stuff to be reviewed. Until then, stay meta.